Hello friends, welcome to Defense IAS Academy. Please do watch our videos. If you do like, please give thumbs up and share it with your friends, and also enable your notification icon so that you get latest updates from Defense IAS Academy, and please do share it with your friends. Our topic for today is Wildlife Protection Act 1972. So Wildlife Protection Act 1972, what is it? So the Wildlife Protection Act, it provides safeguard and protection for the wildlife, both flora and fauna in the country. And this is an important legislation, and it forms an important part of environment and ecology. Now, what does this act provide? This act particularly it provides protection for the country's wild animals, birds and plant species in order to ensure environmental and ecological security. And the act also lays down restrictions on hunting many animal species, and this act extends to whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Prior to this legislation, that is prior to this Wildlife Protection Act, there were only 5 designated national parks in India, but after this legislation was imposed, we have now 101 national parks in India. So these parks are mainly aimed at safeguarding and protecting the wildlife, the birds, the animals, the plant species, and the complete ecology that is surrounding, that is the ecology and the ecosystem that is surrounding them. So what are the constitutional provisions for this Wildlife Act? So we have two articles that are supporting the Wildlife Act, Article 48A and Article 51G. These are the articles which supports the Wildlife Act. So what does this Article 48A says? Now this is an article where the Constitution of India directs the state to protect and improve the environment and safeguard wildlife and forest. This article was added to the Constitution by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. And now what does Article 51AG tells? So it gives certain fundamental duties for the people of India. One of them is to protect and improve the natural environment, including the forests, lakes, rivers, wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. That is, it tells the fundamental duties, or it tells to the people of India that you have a duty to protect the lakes, rivers, forests, wildlife, and also have compassion to the living creatures. Now let's see the authorities that are appointed under this act. The central government appoints the Director of Wildlife Preservation and the Assistant Directors, and also the officers who are subordinate to the Director. And the state government appoints a Chief Wildlife Warden who can head the wildlife wing of the department and exercise complete administrative control over the protected areas within a state. The state government is also responsible for appointing wildlife wardens in each district that belongs to the state. So the central government and the state government equally play an important role in the wildlife preservation. Okay, so before this Wildlife Act of 1972, was there any other laws or legislation in India that helped in protection of wildlife and the flora and the fauna? Yes, there was such laws. The first such law was passed by the British Indian government in the year 1887, which was called the Wild Birds Protection Act 1887. And this law was made the possession and the sale of wild birds which were either killed or captured illegal. And there was also a second law which was enacted in 1912, which was called as the Wild Bird and Animal Protection Act, and this was amended in the year 1935 when the Wild Birds and Animal Protection Amendment Act of 1935 was passed. But during the British rule, wildlife protection was not a priority, and it was after 1960 that the issue of wildlife and the prevention of certain species from being extinct became a priority in the for the Indian government. Now, what was the need of wildlife protection? So, why did the government felt like there should be laws or fundamental duties given to the citizen for wildlife protection? Now, wildlife is a part of forest, and this was a state subject until the parliament passed the law of 1972. Now, what are the reasons for a nationwide law that came for the protecting the environment? The reasons were India had a wide variety of flora and fauna, and many of these species were getting rapidly declined in numbers, and so India found, or the government found, that it should be made a priority to protect the wildlife and the flora and the fauna before the many varieties get extinct, or they no more exist. And also there was a drastic decrease in the ecological balance. So the decrease in flora and fauna, it caused an ecological imbalance which affects many aspects of climate and ecosystem. That was another reason for implementing the Wildlife Protection Act, or why government thought there should be a Wildlife Protection Act. The third reason is that during the British rule, or the British era, the the wild birds and the animals where protection law was enacted in 1935, and this law, as we told earlier, during the British rule, the wildlife protection was not given a priority. So this the act that was implemented by the British rule, which was called as Wildlife, Birds and Animals Protection Act 1935, had to be upgraded, as punishments were awarded to the poachers and the traders of the wildlife products, and there was a huge financial benefits that occur to them. And the fifth reason was there were only 5 national parks in India. So the wildlife protection was with this only 5 national parks throughout India was quite difficult. So there were they wanted to have more national parks and sanctuaries and tiger reserves, so that the wildlife and the flora and the fauna get they don't extinct, they get improved, their condition gets improved, and there comes an ecological balance in the ecosystem. So these were the reasons why the Indian government felt that they need an protection act, or a wildlife protection act, and the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 was proposed, or it came into being. Now, what are the features of this act? What are the features of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972? Now, this act provides mainly protection for a listed species of animals, birds and plants, and also for the establishment of a network of ecologically important protected areas in the country. The Act also provides a formation of wildlife advisory boards, wildlife wardens, specifies who has what power, who has to perform what duties, etc. So it helped India become a party to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, that is CITES. So the Wildlife Protection Act helped India to become a part of this international trade Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. So coming to the salient features of our Act, the first feature is that it prohibits the hunting of any wild animal specified in schedules 1, 2, 3 and 4 of the Act. Okay, we'll discuss in detail about the schedules later. So just for time being, we'll say schedule 1, 2, 3 and 4. So it prohibits the hunting of the wild animals specified in these schedules. Now, what are the exceptions of this particular like prohibition of hunting? So, a wild animal that is listed under these schedules can be hunted or killed only after getting a permission from the chief wildlife warden of the state if that particular animal become dangerous to the human life or to the property, including the crops on any land, and also it is disabled or suffering from a disease that is beyond recovery. So these are the two exceptions, either it become dangerous or it is suffering from some disease that cannot be recovered. These are the two exceptions for killing or hunting an animal that is listed in the schedules of 1, 2, 3 and 4. So that is the first feature of this Act. Now, what is the second feature? Second is prohibition of cutting or uprooting specified plants. So, this particular Act has a feature which prohibits the uprooting and damaging or collection and possession or selling of any specified plant from any forest land or any protected area. So, it has provisions for blocking or preventing uprooting, damage, collection, possession and selling of the plants or the trees that are part of a forest land or any protected area. So what is the exception in this particular criteria? The chief wildlife warden can give permission for uprooting or collecting a specific plant for a purpose of education or scientific research or preservation in herbarium, or if a person or an institution is approved to do so by a central government. So these are the exceptions of cutting or uprooting a specified plant from the forest. Okay, so either it's for an educational purpose, or it's for a scientific purpose, or it's for an or it's for a person or institution who got an approval from the central government. So that's the second salient feature of the Wildlife Protection Act. Now third is declaration and protection of wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. So the central government can constitute any area as a sanctuary provided the area is of adequate ecological, faunal, floral, geomorphological, natural or zoological significance. So if it has or if it qualifies all the specified features, then that area can be declared as a sanctuary. And the government can also declare an area, including an area within a sanctuary, as a national park. And the collector is appointed by the central government to administer the area that is declared as a sanctuary. So this particular act has the right to declare and protect the wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. The fourth feature is constitution of various bodies. The Wildlife Protection Act, it provides for the constitution of bodies to be established under this act, such as the National and State Board for Wildlife, Central Zoo Authority and the National Tiger Conservation Authority. The fifth property or feature is government property. The hunted wild animals or other vermin, animals, articles or meat of a wild animal and ivory imported to India and an article made from such ivory shall be considered as a property of the government. That is the next feature of this act. So, and whatever that you get from a wildlife or a wild animal, either hunted or killed, whatever you get from a wild animal, it is considered as the property of the government. Now, what are the bodies that are constituted under this act? What all bodies comes under this act? The first body is the National Board for Wildlife, NBWL, National Board for Wildlife. As per the act, the central government of India shall constitute the National Board for Wildlife, NBWL. It serves as an apex body for the review of all wildlife related matters and for the approval of projects in and around national parks and sanctuaries. The NBWL is chaired by the Prime Minister and is responsible for promotion of conservation and development of wildlife and forest. The Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is the Vice Chairperson of the board. This board has an advisory in nature and can only advise the government on policy for making the conservation of life. So, it's mainly an advisory board where it's chaired by the Prime Minister, and it is mainly responsible for promotion and conservation of the wildlife and the forest. Next body is the Standing Committee of NBWL. The NBWL constitutes a standing committee for the purpose of approving all the projects that is falling within the protected wildlife areas or within the 10 kilometer of them. This committee is also chaired by the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Next body is the State Board for Wildlife, that is SBWL. The state governments are responsible for constitution of the State Board of Life, and the Chief Minister of a particular state or union territory is the chairperson of the board, that's of the state SBWL. And this board advises the state government for selection and management of the areas that can be declared as a protected area, then formulation of policy for protection and conservation of the wildlife, and also any matter that is related to the amendment of any schedules, the 6 schedules that are under this Wildlife Protection Act. The fourth body is Central Zoo Authority. This act provides for the constitution of the Central Zoo Authority, which has a total of 10 members, including the chairperson and the member secretary. Now, who is the chairperson over here? It's the Environment Minister. Environment Minister is the chairperson of the Central Zoo Authority. And this authority provides recognition to zoos and is also tasked with regulating the zoos across the country. Now, it also gives guidelines and it also gives rules under which the animals may be transferred from one zoo to another nationally and internationally. So, that's with the Central Zoo Authority. The next body that comes under the act is National Tiger Conservation Authority, that is NTCA. Now, the NTCA has or it was constituted in 2005, and the main aim is for strengthening the tiger conservation, and this act was came into being, or this act came into existence after the recommendation of the Tiger Task Force. Now, what does this particular body do? Now, and who is the chairperson? The Union Environment Minister is the chairperson of NTCA, and the state environment minister is the vice chairperson. Okay, chairperson is the union environment minister, and vice chairperson is the state environment minister. And the central government has recommendations to the NTCA, where it declares an area as tiger reserve. And more than 50 wildlife sanctuaries in India has been designated as tiger reserves and are protected areas under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. The last body that comes under the Wildlife Protection Act is the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. Now, what does this particular body do? The Act provides the constitution of the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau WCCB to combat organized wildlife crime in the country. So, it is for controlling the wildlife crime or the crimes against the wildlife in the country. Now, this bureau WCCB has its headquarters in New Delhi, and it is mandated to, or what does it do, what is it expected to do, what is mandatory from this particular WCCB. First is that it can collect and collate the intelligence related to the organized wildlife crime activities, and also disseminate the same to the state to apprehend the criminals. Then it has an provision to establish a centralized wildlife crime data bank. Then it can assist in the state governments to ensure success in the prosecutions related to the wildlife crimes. And this particular bureau also has the power to advise the government of India on issuing the issues or it can advise the government on issues that are relating to the wildlife crime, whether it is national or international ramifications and its relevant policies and laws. So that those are the 6 bodies that are constituted or that come under the Wildlife Protection Act. Next, the schedules. So we have 6 schedules that are coming under the Wildlife Protection Act, which are aimed at protecting the various plants and animals. So let us see about the 6 schedules. Now the Schedule 1. So what does the Schedule 1 says? The Schedule 1, it is aimed for species that are categorized as endangered species. It is for the endangered species. And if you hunt or if you kill any endangered species, the punishment or the penalty is harsh imprisonment. So this particular schedule, it covers the endangered species that needs rigorous protection, and these species are granted protection from poaching, killing, trading, etc. And the person who is doing it or the person who does it will be given a harshest punishment of the law that harshest punishment that is available under the law. Now the species under this schedule are prohibited to be hunted throughout the India except under threat for a human life or it has a disease that is beyond recovery. And hunting is strictly not allowed and trading is prohibited, and some of the animals that are granted protection under the schedule 1 include the tiger, black buck, Himalayan brown bear, brow antlered deer, then the blue whale, then the common dolphin, cheetah, clouded leopard, hornbills, Indian gazelle, and many others. So these are the list of animals that come under the schedule 1, which are facing severe extinctions or endangerment, and hunting them will be will lead to harsh imprisonment. Next is our schedule 2. So the animals that come under this list are also given high protection with the prohibition on their trade, and they cannot be hunted except they are a threat to a human life, or they are suffering from any disease that cannot be recovered. So the penalty is very harsh if you hunt an animal that come under this category. Hunting is strictly not allowed. Trading is also prohibited, and the examples of some animals that come under this list are the Kohinoor, which is an insect, then the Assamese macaw, then the Bengal Hanuman langur, large Indian civet, Indian fox, larger Kashmir flying squirrel, then Kashmir fox and sperm whale, then Indian cobra, king cobra. All these are the salamander. All these are the list of animals that come under the schedule of 2, where hunting and trading is strictly prohibited. Next, like schedule 3 and 4. What does the schedule 3 and 4 say? The schedule says that the species that are not endangered are not included in schedule 2 and 3 and 4. Species are not endangered, and hunting them or poaching them or trading them will give you less penalty or imprisonment compared to the schedules 1 and 2, and hunting is strictly not allowed. This particular schedule 3 and 4 says that the protected species with they say that they give protection to not endangered species with hunting prohibited, and penalty of this violation will be less compared to the two schedules. Now, what are the animals that are protected under the schedule 3 and 4? It's hyena, Himalayan rat, porcupine, flying fox, the Malabar tree toad. Then the animals protected under schedule 4 are flamingo, falcons, kingfishers, magpie, then hares, etc. So the 3 and 4 together protect this particular list of animals. The schedule 5. What does the schedule 5 says? Now the schedule 5 contains animals that are considered as vermin, that is small wild animals that carry disease and destroy plants and foods. So these animals can be hunted, that is hunting is allowed, and the species that come under this particular category is the common crows, fruit bats, then rats and mice. So these are the animals that come under the schedule 5, usually considered as vermin and is allowed to be hunted. Now the last schedule, schedule 6, it provides for regulation in the cultivation of a specified plant and restricts its possession, sale and transportation. Both cultivation and trading of a specified plant can only be carried out with the prior permission of a competent authority. Okay, so what are the plants that come under this category? The plants are the Beddoes cycad, which is native to India, then the blue vande or called as blue orchid, then red vande also called as red orchid, then hoot, I hope it is pronounced like that, then the slipper orchids, which is also called as Paphiopedilum. Okay, maybe my pronunciation is wrong. Then the pitcher plant. All these are the particular plants that are included under schedule 4, whose cultivation and trade needs prior permission from a competent authority. Now, what are the areas which are protected under the Wildlife Protection Act? There are 5 types of areas which can be protected using this law. which are described as sanctuaries, national parks, then conservation reserves, then community reserves and tiger reserves. So these are the five types of protected areas that we can have under this particular law. So what is a sanctuary? Sanctuary is a place of refuge where the injured or the abandoned or the abused wildlife is allowed to live in peace in their natural environment without any human intervention. Okay, so it is like a peace life for the injured and abandoned wildlife. And these sanctuaries are naturally occurring areas where endangered species are protected from poaching, hunting and predation. Here the animals not breed for commercial exploitation, and these species are protected from any sort of disturbances, and the animals that are living inside the sanctuaries cannot be captured or killed. And this wildlife sanctuary, it is declared by a state government by a notification, and the boundaries of this sanctuary can be altered by resolution of the state legislature. And the human activities such as harvesting, collecting minor forest products and private ownership, then ownership rights are permitted as long as they do not interfere with the animal well-being. And usually limited human activity is provided inside sanctuaries. These sanctuaries are not open to general public. And one more thing is that the boundaries are not fixed and defined. It can be changed depending upon the state government. And the biologists and researchers are permitted inside so that they can study about the area and inhabitants, so that if at all any modification need to be provided can be given. The examples of the sanctuaries include Indian Wild as Sanctuary, that is in Rann of Kutch, Gujarat. Then the Vedantangal Bird Sanctuary in Tamil Nadu, which is the oldest bird sanctuary in India. Then the Dandeli Wildlife Sanctuary, which is in Karnataka. Next is national parks. The national parks are areas that are set by the government to conserve the natural environment. A national park can have more restrictions as compared to a wildlife sanctuary. The national parks are also declared by state government by a notification, but the boundaries of the national park cannot be altered, and except a special resolution passed by a state legislature. And the main objective of the national park is to protect the natural environment of the area and biodiversity conservation. The landscape, fauna, flora are present in their natural state in the national parks. They have a fixed boundary and which is defined, and also strictly no human activity is allowed. Grazing of livestock or private tenurial rights are also not permitted here as in the sanctuaries. And the species that are mentioned in the schedules of the Wildlife Act are not allowed to be hunted or captured. So it is like not at all a human intervention in this particular area that is declared as national park. The national park cannot be downgraded to the status of a sanctuary. Examples of national parks are the Bandipur National Park in Karnataka, then the Hemis National Park in Jammu and Kashmir, then the Kaziranga National Park in Assam, etc. Next protected area is called as conservation reserves. So conservation reserve is area that is declared by state government. Particularly this area are adjacent to the sanctuaries or the national parks, and it is for the conservation of this particular area is declared after consulting with the local communities, and this adjacent area to the sanctuaries and park are for the protection of wildlife and the flora and fauna. Next area is the community reserves. The state government can declare an area as private or community land as a community reserve after consultation with a local community or an individual who has volunteered to conserve the wildlife. Next, the last protected area is the tiger reserves. These areas, that is the tiger reserves, are reserved for the protection and conservation of tigers in India, and they are declared on the recommendations of the National Tiger Conservation Authority. So these five areas, sanctuaries, national parks, conservation reserves, community reserves and tiger reserves, together help us to protect the wildlife, the flora and the fauna, and exhibit or give an ecological balance to the environment. So that's with the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. I hope this was an informational video for you, and it will help you definitely for the upcoming exams. If you like this video, please do subscribe to the channel Defense IAS Academy, like us and share the video with your friends. Thank you.